Hello, Tungsten Miner here, beginning part 4 of the Mod Spotlight series on Create. Today, I'll be talking about various kinds of stationary machines. Let's jump in. Starting off this video, we're going to take a look at this Millstone. So this is a thing which allows you to basically crush up small bits of stuff and turn it into other stuff. So this is the machine by itself. It is powered by a cogwheel of some kind, which turns the cog that's attached to the machine. Here's a more advanced setup that you can see will pipe some stuff in through a hopper. It's getting powered basically the same way. And then this is a funnel, which allows you to pull things out of the machine. So normally, if I've got this poppy, I would need to drop the poppy, and you can see it gets crushed up. And now, well, the material is just stuck in the machine. So I right click on the machine. Now I've got my red dye out again. But if I grab myself a poppy over here, I can toss it into the hopper and it gets processed into the machine. And then this funnel will extract the dye and drop that out. And the other piece of dye. So a depot can only hold one thing at a time. So it produced 2 dye, but just one at a time. So if we look at the Millstone recipes, grab one of these, and then I'm going to say, look at my recipes. Basically, you're mostly grinding plants into dyes or other plants, taking stone to cobblestone, sandstone to sand, charcoal into black dye and things. So you can grind wool into string, so a good source of string early on. But mostly it's to do with dyes and plants and little things like that. Here we have a set of crushing wheels. We've looked at these before. Just to note that these are actually turning in opposite directions. So we can see around back here, I've got this one set to 16 and that one set to -16, so that the two of them move in opposite directions. And what you need to do to crush things up is to drop the item into the space above the wheels, and the output will drop out of the wheels down below. So I've set up this contraption here, which allows us to basically automate the processing of things, so that I can toss things into this hopper over here. I've got a fan over here, which is itself being powered from below by one of these creative motors, and that will blow air up through these chutes so that the item gets placed into the chest. And then this funnel is going to take things out of the chest and move it along the belt until it gets to this brass tunnel. The brass tunnel is moving every iron ingot this way and everything else this way. And I'm not going to put any iron ingots in, so I'll get everything else coming this way. Drops through the chute into the wheels. Finally, that drops down onto the belts, and the belts will take it through this funnel back into this chest. On the back side, we can see the power is provided by this one creative motor, which goes into this cog, this cog, this cog, this cog. So we wind up with this direction being opposite to this direction because it went through 2 different transitions to get here. And then I'm using these encased chain drives to move the power up and down a little bit to be able to reach the various things it needs to reach, one of which is to power this belt on top here, which is moving our items along. And then this belt is just for moving the power up. And then on these encased chain drives on the other side, those are powering the wheels and powering the belt on this side. So one source of power for the whole contraption, with the exception of this guy, which is using another engine underneath. So what can you do with this thing? Well, I'm going to grab a few things that we can do with this. First, let's look at some recipes here. Use of this guy. So we can drop all sorts of walls and bricks and stairs and all sorts of things into here, and you'll get out crushed iron ore, maybe, from some of these things with a little bit of extra iron nuggets. Can drop in some ore of various kinds, so redstone and iron and copper and all the various ones. You'll usually get at least as much as you would have normally gotten in a furnace, plus the small chance of getting some extra stuff. So if we throw some, let's go ahead, well, let's talk about this one, gold ore. We're going to get 7 nuggets plus a 50% chance of getting some more out of that. And remember, normally nether gold ore would produce just a couple of nuggets. Copper ore will give you 7 crushed copper for sure, which again, remember, is a little bit more than you normally would get from raw copper, plus 25% chance of getting even extra more. So let's see this thing in action. I'm going to grab some iron ore, and we'll put that into, the hopper. I already set this up for myself. So here I've got some nether quartz ore, iron ore, copper ore, gold ore, and redstone ore, and I'm holding it in position using this lever. So when I throw this off, we can see the hopper feeds items one at a time into the chute. Each chute can have 1 item in it, so it holds on to the item until the next one is cleared. Those are getting pushed up into the chest, getting pulled out, and then dropped, crunch, 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 into this guy. And each belt likewise can hold 1 item at a time, so those things are just kind of hanging around until there's some space. 1 kind of item, I should say. You can see it'll hold a stack of things. But each belt has 1 item, 1 kind of item at a time. And then finally, all of that has wound up getting crunched up into all of my extra stuff here. So that's crushing wheels and a little bit of automation. Next up is the turntable. I don't think it does much. Basically, this is what it does. If you stand on it, it spins you around. This applies to other entities, of course, but I haven't really found any documentation that it really is useful for much else. So there you go. That's the turntable. Next up is the Cuckoo Clock. So we can see here, Cuckoo Clock is just about at noon, and sure enough, the sun is just about at noon. I have very deliberately kept the time from not advancing forward so that I can say set, time set, and we're going to say 6,000. And so our little piggy comes out because it's now exactly noon and it's chiming the hour. And if I say time set 1200, it's now dusk. And that's it. He's done his chiming for now. So time set 1 moment before noon. See the clock's hands change. Really, that's all it's good for. It tells you what time it is, and it will chirp when it's just past time that you can go to sleep, or it's at noon, or on the hour. Okay, here we're getting to some of the more interesting mechanics of the game. This is an encased fan. We've seen these a couple of times before. It's now spinning at 64 RPM, so pretty good speed. If I stand in front of this, it's going to push me along until I reach some obstacle. And this actually goes for quite a few blocks more at this speed. So it doesn't push you very fast, of course, but it does push you along. Same thing for any other entity that comes along. So if you've got a zombie problem, for example, you might be able to turn on some encased fans to push them off of a catwalk or something into some lava, perhaps. Lots of interesting potential uses for this, but there's a fascinating crafting mechanic that gets added. So here I've got an encased fan, I've got a trapped water source block, and I've got the fan blowing through the water source block, which creates these water particles. The water particles will soak whatever item is coming through. This belt is moving at 2 RPM, so pretty darn slowly, but if you go too fast, the items won't get wet enough in order to make whatever the transformation is. So if I take white concrete powder, for example, and toss it on the belt, it will very slowly make its way through until it gets into the water particles, and you can see it's starting to get soaked. And eventually it transforms into plain concrete. So I can just grab that off the belt, and here we are as concrete. So unlike your normal vanilla mechanic of having to drop this in water or all these other kind of time-consuming, difficult things, here you could just take your concrete powder and drop it on a belt and have it run through one of these things. Now, this is running at 2 RPM, moving pretty slowly. If I set up a second fan and a second water source block, as you might imagine, it's going to continue to get wet, so I could go twice as fast. And if I had 4 of these, it could go 4 times as fast. So you can process a lot more quickly if you set up more fans. Other things that can be processed, we can turn sand into clay, and we can turn crushed iron ore. And this is actually a pretty important one, so we'll try that next. Oops, I didn't realize I could toss it that far. Let's try this again. So the crushed iron ore is going to go through, and it's going to get turned into washed iron ore. And this is how you give yourself the best chance of getting the most ore possible. Because now I've got 9 iron nuggets, but if I look at my crushed iron ore and I throw it in a blasting furnace, I'm just going to get 1 iron ingot, which is basically what I've got. I've just got the nuggets. Smelting it, same deal. If I throw it through washing, I'm going to get my 9 iron nuggets, but I have a small chance of getting some redstone dust, so getting some extra stuff out of it. And if I throw one of these through blasting, I'm just going to get my iron ingot like I do in all these other things. So pretty handy way of getting the most out of whatever it is that you've got going on. Another thing you can do is wash the paint off of something or the dye off of something. So if I toss glass or wool or anything else that's colored into this kind of system, it's going to wash the paint off of that object. I can also take ice and throw it in here, and it's going to convert it into packed ice. So now you can see I've got my plain glass back again. I can also take wheat flour and throw that in here. Yeah, so now I've got my packed ice. There's a whole bunch of different ways to make packed ice in this mod pack, and some of them are better than others in that you get a 1-to-1 output. Not all of them do that. And so now this has been transformed into dough, which can later be cooked into, or turned into slime balls, but can also be cooked into bread. And the flour is 1 wheat. So instead of taking 3 wheat to make a piece of bread, you just need 1. And then finally, the last thing that is very handy to use this for is to turn magma blocks, which I always seem to wind up with way too many of, and it will wash them, cool them, and turn them into obsidian. And so this is a very much faster and easier way to get your hands on some obsidian. So that's kind of it for what you can do with the washing mechanic, but that's not the only thing you can do. If we have a lava block, we're going to be able to smelt things. So raw iron, cobblestone, glass, all of these things can get smelted, basically, and it works out to be more or less the same thing you get if you toss these things through a furnace. So I can take my tiled glass, for example, which is kind of one of the special cut versions of glass, and turn this back into regular glass. But I can also take things like iron horse armor and melt that down, or I can take my redstone ore and melt that down. Now, this is one of those places where you kind of don't want to do this, because if you run this through a crushing setup, you'll get 6 plus maybe extra. If you run it through a blasting setup, then you're just going to get 1. So this is clearly not the thing you want to do with this, but it is possible, right? So definitely give that some thought before you use up this resource. One thing to warn you about, though, is that even though this does look like it makes things hot, it actually is too hot for making food. So any food items you throw through here are going to get completely burned up, which takes us to this. If you set this up with fire instead of lava, so basically replace that stack in the middle there with this stack over here, you're going to be able to cook food. So you can turn dough into bread and beef and chicken and lamb and all the different ones into their cooked counterparts, and you can dry out kelp. That last one is especially useful because all of these belts use kelp, so you're going to need to have a lot of dried kelp for making belts and things. The last piece that you can use this for is, again, if you replace the lava and stone stack there with soul sand and the soul fire, then you can do all of these conversions too. So campfires into soul campfires, torches into soul torches, and so forth. Particularly handy if you want to be able to like turn these sweet berries into glow berries. Glow berries not very easy to find, or get glow ink sacks from your regular ink sacks. So pretty handy to be able to enchant, curse, I don't know, haunt your various items going through this same kind of washing mechanic. Next up, we're looking at the mechanical press. There's actually a whole bunch of different things you can do with this. So we're going to tackle the uses one at a time. So the first is just squashing things. So here I've got a depot. I can drop an item on there. The thing will come down and squash it into whatever material. So various kinds of metals into their appropriate kinds of metal plates, sugarcane into paper, and dirt into dirt path. I guess you'd want to do this maybe because you got to use a shovel to make dirt paths. I don't know. That one doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Easier just use the shovel in place, but whatever. You can do it that way too. But if you combine your mechanical press with a basin, you can compact things. So basically, let's take a look at the automated packing feature, which is what we're looking at here. So if you throw 9 ingots, you get a block of copper out again. If you put in honey bottles, you get out a honey block, which I guess makes sense. Coal can be compacted to blocks of coal. So basically any recipe that is fill up a crafting grid with one thing and get its block version out again is going to be possible through this mechanic here. And it works for pretty much everything you'd expect it to, all the normal things. And so I've got a couple of examples here. Of various kinds of things. So string, for example, I can take my string and toss it in here. Press comes down and I get some wool out again on the other side. However, that's not all. If you look at the recipes for compacting things, you can take a bunch of different sort of things and make an entirely new substance out of it. So for example, honey can be turned into a honey block. So I grab my honey and I just right click. It's filled up with honey, press comes down, squash, and I get a honey block out again. Same deal with chocolate. I can make myself chocolate bars, but I can also make different kinds of stone. So if I fill this up with lava, and I'm in creative, so I'm not losing my materials here, just in case you were wondering. And I toss my flints in here, and I toss my gravel in here. This is what you mostly want to do. This is automation. Press comes down once all the materials have arrived, and I get andesite. And thinking back on how much andesite one winds up using, that's actually pretty darn valuable. Let me clear out my basin here for my next trick. And the last thing is to take cinder flour, which you might remember we talked about a while back. Toss that in there, maybe. And an egg and some sugar. Press comes down. And we get a blaze cake base. Now, we're going to need to pour some more stuff on this, namely lava, to make a blaze cake out of it. And we haven't talked about fluid stuff yet, so hold that thought. We'll come back to blaze cakes when we talk about fluids next. So this setup gives you the ability to compact things and the ability to make some stuff that you may not be able to make any other way. Okay, last up for this video, we're going to talk about mixers. Mixers have a whole bunch of different things you can do with them. We're going to skip the ones that have to do with fluids and cover that next time when we talk about fluids. But for now, let's talk about some of the other things you can do. For example, mixers can be used to create any shapeless recipe. So, for example, if you took a candle and you took some red dye and you just went into any old crafting table, and let me grab a crafting table, toss that down, and toss these on here. Any place at all that I want to put this red dye, it's going to craft a red candle out of this. However, if I take my red candle and my red dye, toss them in here, the mixer will come down, and it will spit out a red candle, just as though I had crafted them on a crafting grid myself. So this works for absolutely any shapeless crafting recipe. So I can mix two dyes together, I can put wax on some copper, I can take some dye, sand, and gravel and make concrete powder. So let's just toss those in there, for example. So now I've got my bunch of concrete. And then if I send this onto a belt and the belt goes through that washing thing we talked about before, we can wind up making concrete in a fairly automated way. You can even take things that really don't make sense to work in a mixer at all, like concrete and gunpowder, and take these two things and toss them in here. And what do you wind up with? Mix, 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 crunch, crunch, crunch. A fragile gunpowder and paper rocket. Go figure. Well, they still work. I guess that's good news. So pretty much any recipe at all that involves automated shapeless crafting. And you can notice even in this mod pack, which is really just Create by itself, I've got already 86 pages of recipes, even things like andesite slabs getting somehow mixed into regular cut andesite. Lots and lots of things. Some of them don't make a lot of sense. But let's take a quick detour and talk about blaze burners. So the notion here is a blaze burner is a source of heat that you can put underneath one of these basins and access a bunch of other recipes which require melting or otherwise heating the ingredients rather than just simply mixing them. To make one of these things, first you need to make yourself an empty blaze burner. Recipe is pretty straightforward. But then, to get a blaze inside of it, you need to, well, start with a blaze, and then right-click it with your blaze burner. And now I've got myself a blaze burner with the blaze installed inside. The blaze itself, though, isn't going to do much for you without being fed. So here's a blaze that's quiet and quiescent. It's got no fuel, and it's at the lowest point of heat, which is too low to actually do anything useful. So in here, I've got some coal, and I'm just going to right-click on the blaze to feed him some coal. And now he's all warmed up and ready to go. And he'll stay this way for a while, kind of like a furnace. But eventually he'll cool off, and he'll need to be fed coal some more. There's a whole bunch of things you can do with this that involve making fluids of one kind or another. I'm going to skip those two, come back to them. But the three that are pretty important and very useful early on. One is to take zinc and copper and make brass, and brass is used in a whole bunch of different things. Another is to take water and flour and turn that into dough, very useful for making food. And of course, we just talked about cooking dough into bread. So every 1 wheat turns into 1 piece of bread. And then you can also take zinc nuggets and andesite and make yourself andesite alloy. And if you remember, we talked about the recipe for this way, way back. If you do this by ordinary crafting, it takes 2 of each to make 1 andesite alloy. But if you do it through this mixing process, you wind up with andesite alloy 1-to-1. So andesite zinc gets you 1 of these rather than 2-to-1. And there's no heating required for this particular recipe, so you can do that in this setup over there as well. But for making brass, for example, you do need to have heat for this particular one, as well as for many, many of the other ones that involve liquids and so forth. And that's it for this time. There's also a whole bunch of more machines. So the next video will be walking through the remainder of the stationary machines, and then we'll jump into fluids, I think, after that. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button down below, and subscribe for more mod spotlights.